So, alright guys, that was Final Fantasy mode. That was our second playthrough of Final Fantasy 16. Now completed. Beautiful game, and I'm just really happy to be able to say that the second playthrough, although a lot of flaws that were kind of established to me as a result of playing the first playthrough, came through a lot more, and I was able to like really kind of notice how they pull the game down, such as, you know, the pacing in certain areas and stuff. And I didn't really experience them as much because I just skipped through all those boring parts. The fact that I did that made me see just how much they kind of bog the game down. Like, for example, when you're doing the mid stuff, which no pun intended, but the mid side quests, or I'm calling them side quests, look at that, right? The main quest where we had to build a ship for mid, right, which felt like side quests, that was a problem. When I was skipping all those cutscenes the second time around, the sheer amount of skipping I was doing made me really see just how much happens in the game that is boring and is kind of meaningless and doesn't offer anything interesting to the player, right? So little tiny flaws like that I saw a lot more. I'm happy to say though that with the story itself and the ending itself and all the narrative stuff that happens, right, the beginning, middle, and end, the plot, and the characterization, the second time around playing it, I liked it even more. Right, parts of it, especially the stuff that had to do with Ultima, Clive, Barnabas, and a lot of the opinions people have on this game, like a lot of the complaints people have with a lot of parts of this game. I'm happy to say that I'm in the minority that doesn't feel the same way about certain aspects of this game. Like, I don't think Barnabas sucked, right? I don't think Ultima, I will agree, not the coolest villain in FF, but when you see what he is to Clive, right, how he affects Clive, and what he makes Clive realize about himself, and what separates man from God, and what his, you know, his dynamic with Clive is. That's cool, right? Ultima himself is kind of like, he's kind of just like a loser, right? Even the game establishes that. He's like, they're like, oh, he doesn't know what it's like to have a will. He doesn't know what it's like to have basically humanity, right? So he's kind of a robotic piece of cardboard. As an actual character. He's your generic, I want to take over the world villain, but the kinds of stuff he makes the other characters go through was really cool. Yeah, the ending, I loved it, right? I know a lot of people, understandably, like, I can totally understand why a lot of people may not have liked the ending to this game, because they're like, oh, you know what, there's not enough closure, like, there are a lot of threads that aren't closed and are tied up, and, you know, it kind of comes out of nowhere. I kind of like that about this, and in my opinion, some of the things that were important were tied up, right, and they were closed off. Clive finishes his mission, right? Joshua fulfills his mission too. All the characters, their arcs end up where they logically need to end up, and it really just boils down to, we don't know if they lived or if they died, and I'm fine with that, right? Because if you can tie up a character's arc for this specific story, but give us a little bit more to maybe ask a couple questions about what could potentially come later on down the line to give us a new arc for those characters, I'm totally good with that. So what I'm essentially getting at here is DLC stuff, right? Is Clive alive or dead? We'll see in a DLC maybe, or in an expansion, or 16.2, who knows? Is Joshua alive or dead? 16.2, expansion, DLC, same thing with Dion, right? But for this specific game, what those characters set out to do and what their arcs were, they were all tied up and they did those things. And for that, I'm happy. What I'm saying ultimately is that this game had closure where it needed to have closure, and in the areas where it didn't need to have closure, right? With regards to this game, to the theory that this game is set in a book, I'll say that I'm usually not a fan of those kind of theories, right? The idea that, oh, the whole thing was a dream, the whole thing wasn't a book, the whole thing wasn't actually the real world. I'm not a big fan of those, but weirdly, if that were the case with this game, I wouldn't be as mad. I don't know what it is. I don't know why, but I wouldn't, right? Maybe because there are a lot of like breadcrumbs that kind of hint towards that being the case throughout the whole experience, especially with how Clive narrates certain things, and he sounds, and Joshua as well, and they sound like the author and his style of writing or what. But in this case, that kind of, you know, bodes well with me. I don't actually have a big problem with that if that were the case, but still, you know, my personal theory is I don't want to get too big brain on this, and the simplest explanation to me is, for me personally, the best one in my opinion, right? That the book was written by the Joshua we know, right? Clive saved Joshua in the end with the Phoenix, right? He came back. It was his last act as his shield, and therefore it made it so much more poetic and so much more beautiful. And yeah, it's the same world in the flash forward, but a version set many years later with a new system, a happier place, and yeah, all as a result of Clive and what he set out to do. That's what I think. So yeah, man, I'm really happy to say that I really enjoy the story of Final Fantasy 16, and even more so upon a second playthrough when I really had a chance to reinforce my understanding of certain things I didn't get, of certain things that, you know, maybe I was confused on the first time, and it was great. It was a nice replay, right? I will say that it's a hard game to play through again for certain parts of it where the pacing kind of sucks, but for all of the stuff that is important to the overarching narrative and the story of Clive, it is definitely worth playing again, because you pick up on things you didn't notice the first time, especially with, oh my god, I've got to mention this, right? But the music as well. I said this one time before as well on my replay of this in New Game Plus, but god, I want to say I've never seen something like this before, where the music, in a way, also kind of conveys details to you on the second playthrough that you didn't pick up the first time. Like the leitmotifs of the characters. So a great example is on the second playthrough close to the start, when you see Shiva battling Titan, you hear a bit of Jill's leitmotif when Shiva shows up. But when if you were playing the game for the first time, at that point you would not know that's Jill's leitmotif because you don't see her right before you see Shiva. And so it's really cool like that upon your second playthrough, hearing themes prematurely and knowing what they mean before they actually are, before you find out and it's made clear to you that they're associated with certain characters, and in a way that foreshadows certain things. And I just think that was really cool overall. So yeah, there are a lot of like little things for which this game is worth replaying a second time around, besides the main story, of course. But yeah, when it comes to the gameplay, the combat, all of that, probably not. I wouldn't say so, just because there's nothing really new you're gonna do, right? There really isn't. You're just going to use more of your abilities that you had from the first playthrough. You're going to upgrade them a little bit, and that's kind of it. And the game isn't that much harder, but I will say towards the end, it got really, really good in some areas, right? It didn't become like the hardest game in the world or anything. Not even close, right? But relative to early on, especially relative to like my first playthrough and closer to the end of that one, right, some of the fights towards the end of this, specifically against characters like Barnabas and then Ultima, both round 1 and 2 and both missions, they really gave me a run for my money. They did. And I was really happy about that. Again, they were like no, you know, freaking, I don't know, millennia or insert hardest boss you can think of here by any means. But at the same time, they weren't total pushovers either, you know, and I like that. So ultimately, Final Fantasy mode is a mixed bag, right? It was sort of, you know, a letdown for most parts. I was like expecting it to be harder than it actually was. But for certain parts where I was hoping it will be pretty challenging and make me, you know what, like get on the edge of my seat and really concentrate and make sure I was playing right. For those moments, it was where it needed to be, you know, for a game that's otherwise really easy. So yeah, that's my mini review of Final Fantasy XVI's New Game Plus, whether it's worth playing again. Some of my theories on, you know, what's going on with the ending and the characters and what I think about that, and yeah, just my opinions on everything. So, hell yeah. I liked it a lot overall.